On a rainy afternoon, a boy named Lucas stood trembling, staring at the broken figure of a German shepherd once called Storm. His fur was patchy. Scars crisscrossed his body like a map of battles fought in silence. Everyone had already written him off as just another discarded animal, but Lucas saw something different. He saw a warrior still breathing, still waiting for someone to believe in him. What no one expected was how this one act of kindness, a boy kneeling beside a dog that the world had abandoned, would change not only their lives, but spark a wave of hope across nations. Storm, once crushed by cruelty, would rise again, not as a victim, but as a symbol of survival. Stay with this story, because what happens next is not just about a dog or a boy. It's about redemption, about the kind of loyalty and love that can heal wounds deeper than the eye can see. The world knew Victor Reinhardt as a man of vision, wealth, and boundless compassion. His name glimmered across magazine covers in gold-lettered headlines. The billionaire with a heart, the tech titan who saved the forgotten heroes. From algorithms to altruism. In every photograph, his smile was flawless. White teeth gleaming beneath the soft wash of camera lights, his arm draped casually around the neck of a German shepherd or Belgian Malinois. He stood tall, handsome still at 53, his tailored suits cut to flatter a physique carefully maintained by personal trainers and private chefs. Around him, the dogs always looked serene, almost rehearsed, their ears perked, their bodies obediently still. These images saturated the internet, carried into the living rooms of millions, painting Victor as a modern saint who had turned his fortune toward mercy. He had built his empire on artificial intelligence, pioneering software that mapped consumer behavior with eerie precision. Billions had flowed into his accounts, and with them came the urge, or perhaps the performance, of giving back. His chosen cause, retired canines. Soldiers without uniforms, heroes with scars, too often discarded when their working years were done. Where others saw cost and liability, Victor claimed to see dignity. His estate in the Austrian Alps was said to house dozens of these dogs, cared for until their last breath. It was the sort of story that begged to be believed. The media adored him. At lavish parties beneath chandeliers dripping with crystal, he spoke of loyalty and sacrifice. His voice carried across banquet halls, where champagne sparkled and strings played. Guests leaned in as he described his sanctuary, his vision of a place where dogs could live in peace. They applauded, moved to tears by anecdotes he recited with polished ease. A shepherd that once dragged a wounded soldier from gunfire, a Malinois that sniffed out explosives in a crowded train station. He always ended with a flourish. These animals gave us everything. It's only right we give them back their dignity. Journalists swooned. Profiles portrayed him as a rare breed of billionaire. Not just brilliant, but benevolent. A man who understood that power meant responsibility. Glossy spreads showed him kneeling in manicured gardens, hand resting gently on the head of a dog with soft brown eyes. The captions beneath read like scripture. Victor Reinhardt, guardian of the forgotten. But behind the polished photos and the artful lighting, there was a silence too deep to notice unless you listened closely. At the mansion itself, a sprawling palace of stone and glass perched above a valley, guests were shown the same select scenes. A handful of dogs played fetch on immaculate lawns. A few slept contentedly on plush bedding in rooms lined with cedar. Tour guides hired by Victor explained how every retired canine found a home here, how no expense was spared for their care. It was a performance so flawless that no one thought to look behind the curtains. The truth was veiled, hidden in the hushed spaces the cameras never reached. Yet to the world, Victor's legend grew. Charities named him their patron. Animal rights conferences invited him as keynote speaker. Politicians shook his hand, eager to be photographed beside him. And ordinary people, sitting in living rooms far away, felt a small comfort knowing that someone, somewhere, was giving old service dogs the life they deserved. It was easier to believe in the myth than to search for the cracks. And perhaps no one believed it more than Victor himself. He wore the mask so often it clung to his skin. But there was one pair of eyes in that house that never fully trusted what they saw. Lucas Reinhardt, 12 years old, watched his father with the quiet intensity of a boy who spent more time listening than speaking. He had seen the magazines stacked on coffee tables, the reporters trailing their equipment through the halls, the way his father's voice grew warm and magnanimous in front of an audience. To strangers, Victor was light. To Lucas, he was a shadow. The boy noticed the things others missed. How the dogs in the photographs were never the same ones he glimpsed in the mansion's courtyard. How the supposed chorus of rescued animals was strangely absent when the parties ended and silence reclaimed the halls. He wondered why, in a house said to hold dozens of dogs, the nights were so eerily still. But questions in that household were unwelcome. When Lucas once asked why he never saw the shepherd from the magazine cover, Victor only chuckled and tousled his hair. "You worry too much, mein Junge. They're just resting." When Lucas pressed again, Victor's smile thinned, his eyes cooling behind their charm. "Trust me. You don't need to know everything." And so, Lucas learned the art of silence. The world, meanwhile, continued its applause. News anchors lauded Victor as a pioneer, not only in technology, but in conscience. In Vienna, a gala raised millions for Reinhardt's sanctuary. He stood on stage, arm lifted, voice steady, as he declared, "We will never abandon those who never abandoned us." Cameras flashed, capturing the exact moment the crowd rose to its feet, moved by his promise. Somewhere near the back of the room, Lucas sat small and invisible, hands folded in his lap. He wanted to believe his father. He wanted to believe the dogs were safe. Yet an unease coiled inside him, a whisper he couldn't silence. If everything is so perfect, why does it feel so wrong? The image of Victor Reinhardt, savior of dogs, spread across continents. It was a story the world was desperate to cling to. But stories, Lucas would soon learn, have two sides. And sometimes the brightest light casts the darkest shadows. The world saw Victor Reinhardt as a man of brilliance, a savior of dogs, a visionary whose generosity dripped from headlines and television broadcasts. But in his own home, his son Lucas lived in the margins of that story, like a smudge in the corner of a painting no one ever noticed. At 12 years old, Lucas already carried the mannerisms of a boy who had grown used to being overlooked. He spoke softly when he spoke at all, and his eyes, grey like a storm not yet broken, had the habit of studying things longer than most people thought necessary. Servants bustled past him in the wide corridors of the mansion, sometimes offering a hurried smile, but rarely pausing. Guests hardly noticed him at Victor's grand parties. Even his father, when speaking with journalists or business partners, seemed to forget Lucas was in the room, until the boy's silence somehow grew too obvious to ignore. But Lucas noticed everything. He noticed the way the air inside the mansion was strangely hollow. A house that supposedly held dozens of dogs should have pulsed with sound. Claws clicking on marble floors, tails thumping against furniture, the occasional bark splitting the silence. Yet the halls of the Reinhardt estate were mostly still, broken only by the hum of air vents or the muffled voices of staff. Lucas thought about the photographs that lined the pages of magazines. His father beaming, hand resting on the head of a shepherd, or Malinois with eyes calm and steady. The captions always said rescued, always spoke of peace and comfort. But those dogs, those specific dogs, Lucas had never seen beyond the glossy spreads. The few dogs he did glimpse in the mansion didn't match the image. Some were restless, pacing in quiet corners, muscles twitching at unseen memories. Others seemed oddly absent, like shadows glimpsed once and then gone. It gnawed at him in the small hours of night. If his father had truly saved so many dogs, why did the estate feel so empty? Why did the silence weigh so heavily, like a secret pressing against the walls? One afternoon, Lucas sat in the grand library, its shelves stretching toward the ceiling like a forest of polished oak. A magazine lay open on the table in front of him, his father's smile frozen across the page. The shepherd at Victor's side looked serene, eyes glossy beneath studio lights. Lucas traced the photo with his finger, lips pressed into a tight line. He knew he had never seen that shepherd in the gardens, or in the halls, or in the so-called playrooms the staff claimed existed in the East Wing. When Victor entered, his cologne arriving a second before his presence, Lucas shut the magazine too quickly. His father noticed. "What are you reading, mein Junge?" Victor's voice carried the warmth of a man trained to charm. He walked toward the table, his steps deliberate, controlled. "Just the article," Lucas murmured. "The one about the shepherd." Victor smiled, the same smile that disarmed investors and journalists alike. He rested a hand on the boy's shoulder, heavy, possessive. "Ah, yes. Brave animal. Saved his handler during a raid in Hamburg. We gave him a good home here, didn't we?" Lucas hesitated. "I haven't seen him around." For the smallest fraction of a second, the air shifted. Victor's hand tightened, then relaxed. His eyes softened, but in a way that felt practiced. "They don't all like to be paraded, Lucas. Some need peace, quiet. They're resting, safe. That's all you need to know." The boy nodded, though unease lingered in the corners of his mind. Later that week, during another one of Victor's receptions, Lucas stood at the edge of the ballroom, invisible among tuxedos and evening gowns. Guests swirled like bright fish in a tank, laughter clinking against crystal glasses. His father stood at the center, telling a story about a dog who once sniffed out a bomb in Vienna. The crowd laughed at his asides, sighed at his solemn pauses, and applauded when he lifted his hand in reverence to the heroes under his care. Lucas shifted, tugging at the cuff of his jacket. From where he stood, he could see through the glass doors into the courtyard. The night was calm, moonlight spilling silver across the stones. If there were dogs outside, he should have heard them. But there was only silence. Again. Always silence. "Why don't you smile, Lucas?" A woman in a sequin dress asked him kindly as she passed. "Your father is doing something wonderful." The boy tried. His lips curved upward, but it was a fragile shape, gone as quickly as it appeared. That night, when the guests had gone and the chandeliers dimmed, Lucas sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the shadows stretched across the floor. He thought about the shepherd in the magazine, about the dogs that never appeared in the gardens, about the silence that filled every corner of the house. He wondered if perhaps he was imagining things, if maybe he was just a boy too young to understand the ways of adults. But deep down, in that place where intuition lives like a quiet ember, he felt the weight of something unspoken. And when he finally asked his father again days later, Victor's answer carried the same careful charm. "You don't need to trouble yourself, Lucas," he said, brushing the boy's hair back with a smile. "Curiosity can be a dangerous thing." The words lingered longer than the smile. That was how Lucas lived, in the shadows of his father's light, with questions pressed like stones against his chest. The world admired Victor Reinhardt, but Lucas had begun to see what no one else dared to look at: the cracks in the image, the silence between the notes of praise. It was not yet proof. It was only unease. But unease, he would learn, was often the first language of truth. And on nights when the mansion grew too quiet, Lucas sometimes thought he heard something beneath the silence, a sound so faint he wondered if it was only in his mind, the muffled whimper of a dog, echoing from somewhere behind the walls. Night in the Reinhardt estate was unlike night anywhere else. The mansion perched on the mountainside, like some forgotten fortress, its stone walls absorbing the wind, its windows catching the moonlight in pale slivers. Inside, the silence was thick and echoing, broken only by the lonely creak of floorboards and the distant hum of hidden machinery that kept the vast house alive. For Lucas, bedtime was never a gentle thing. The marble floors stretched endlessly, reflecting the flicker of wall sconces that burned low after the staff retired. Portraits of ancestors, men in uniforms, women in gowns, watched silently from gilded frames. Their painted eyes seemed to follow him whenever he passed, as if they, too, carried secrets they could not speak. Lucas often quickened his steps in those hallways, as though hurrying might loosen their gaze. That night, the air felt colder than usual. He lay beneath the heavy covers of his bed, staring at the high ceiling where moonlight traced thin patterns across plaster. Sleep refused him. Instead, his ears tuned to the silence, too complete, too perfect. A house filled with dogs should not have been so mute. Where were the gentle sighs of sleeping animals, the soft scrape of claws against stone, the occasional bark breaking the stillness? The quiet was not peaceful. It was suffocating. Rolling onto his side, Lucas pressed his ear against the pillow, trying to let the rhythm of his own heartbeat lull him. But then, there it was. A sound so faint, he wondered if he had dreamed it. A whimper, high-pitched, thin, like the plea of something small and hurting. He froze. For a long moment he lay perfectly still, every muscle taut. Then the sound came again, carried faintly through the air ducts or the hidden hollows of the walls. It was not the bark of a dog demanding play or food. It was softer, wounded, a sound that belonged in shadows. Lucas sat up, his breath shallow. He strained to listen, holding the covers tight around him. The house seemed to hold its breath with him. He waited. The whimpering came again, followed by a scratch, a dull scrape against something metal. The boy swung his legs over the side of the bed, his bare feet meeting the cold marble. The chill shocked him awake, but he welcomed it. It gave him courage. He pulled on his robe, its fabric heavy and comforting, and slipped into the hall. The sconces flickered low, casting long fingers of shadow that stretched across the floor. The portraits stared as he crept past, their eyes glinting faintly in the dim light. The sound grew clearer the farther he walked. It led him down a corridor he rarely entered, one that servants always kept locked or cleaned only in his father's presence. Lucas's heart pounded as he pressed closer to the paneled wall, ear turned toward it. He could hear the whimpers now, distinct, followed by a low groan of chains shifting. He whispered, almost without realizing it, "Who's there?" No answer came, only another scratch, a desperate scrape. The boy's throat tightened. He backed away a step, glancing behind him as though expecting someone to emerge from the shadows. No one did. He was alone in that vast hallway, his small frame dwarfed by the high ceilings and endless marble. Yet in that moment, he was certain someone or something was suffering behind those walls. His breath clouded faintly in the cool air as he lingered there, torn between running back to bed and pressing on. The sensible thing, the safe thing, would be to retreat. But curiosity and dread twisted inside him like two strands of rope. He reached out and touched the wall with trembling fingers. It felt cold, almost pulsing, as though it carried the echoes of what was trapped behind it. For a long moment, he stayed there, his palm pressed against stone, listening. The whimper came again, fainter now, as though the dog, or dogs, were too weak to make more noise. His chest ached. Then, just as suddenly, silence returned. The scratching stopped. The air stilled. Only the distant tick of an antique clock filled the void. Lucas pulled his hand back as if burned. He turned and hurried down the hallway, his robe flaring behind him. His footsteps echoed too loudly in the cavernous space, as if betraying his presence to some invisible watcher. When he reached the safety of his room, he shut the door quickly and pressed his back against it, his heart racing. He waited, straining for sounds, but the house was quiet again, as if mocking his fear. Sliding down to the floor, he pulled his knees to his chest. He told himself he could have imagined it, that the whimpers were nothing more than the groan of pipes, the scratching just the creak of old walls. He wanted to believe it. Yet deep down, in that quiet place where children sense truths adults deny, he knew better. The mansion held secrets, and that night, for the first time, Lucas had heard them whisper. He crawled back into bed, curling tight under the covers. Sleep did not come easily, and when it did, it brought restless dreams of painted eyes watching, of chains rattling in the dark, of dogs crying somewhere beyond reach. By morning, he said nothing. He knew his father's smile too well, the way it brushed aside questions with charm. But the seed had been planted, buried deep in Lucas's chest, where it would grow into something he could no longer ignore. The mansion had spoken, and Lucas had begun to listen. The staff always spoke of Storm as if he were the crown jewel of the Reinhardt estate. "He's the lucky one," Lucas overheard once, a maid whispering to another as they carried trays of silver into the dining hall. Herr Reinhardt saved him from the battlefield. A true hero's companion, given the retirement he deserves. It was the kind of line Victor liked to feed his guests, Storm as the perfect emblem of the Reinhardt legacy. The story went that Storm had been pulled from the rubble of a collapsed building overseas, his handler killed in action, his own body torn but unbroken. Victor had supposedly stepped in, sparing no expense to bring the shepherd back, nursing him with the finest veterinarians until the dog could walk again. Newspapers had eaten it up. Storm's image, his thick sable coat and proud stance, had graced magazine covers beside Victor's smiling face. He was the mascot of compassion, proof that Reinhardt's sanctuary was real. But Lucas, who saw Storm not in the polished frames of a photo shoot, but in the quiet corners of the house, knew there was something the story never said. The first time he saw Storm up close, the shepherd was lying in the courtyard at dusk, the light catching the scars that laced across his hind leg. He rose to his feet when Lucas approached, but not with the eager grace of a dog meeting a friend. He moved stiffly, his gait uneven, the limp pronounced. And when a servant closed a door too sharply nearby, Storm flinched violently, his ears flattening eyes darting toward the sound with a panic that lingered long after silence returned. It unsettled Lucas. Heroes weren't supposed to look like that. He crouched near the shepherd, careful not to reach too quickly. Storm's eyes met his, dark, deep, and carrying something Lucas could not name, but felt in his chest like a stone. The dog didn't wag his tail. He didn't move at all, save for a faint tremor in his shoulders. He simply watched, as if weighing whether the boy was safe, whether this approach was another threat disguised as kindness. "Storm," Lucas whispered, tasting the name that others had spoken with such pride. It felt different on his tongue, softer, almost like a prayer. The dog blinked slowly, then lowered his head, resting it on his paws with a sigh that sounded too human in its weariness. From that moment, Lucas couldn't stop noticing the cracks in the lucky dog's story. Storm rarely barked, rarely played. He walked with a stiffness that spoke of old pain, and he carried himself like a soldier who had seen too much. When Victor brought guests into the courtyard, Storm was often paraded as proof of the sanctuary's success. Cameras clicked, flashes burst, and Victor would rest a hand on Storm's head, coaxing him into stillness. Storm obeyed, but not out of joy. His body stiffened under the weight of those hands, and his eyes, those haunted eyes, looked elsewhere, far beyond the marble arches, as if reliving something no one else could see. To the world, he was a symbol. To Lucas, he was a question. One evening, Lucas lingered near the kitchen door as Storm was led through by a handler. The shepherd limped heavily, claws clicking against the tiles. When the handler tugged at the leash, impatient, Storm stumbled and nearly fell. Lucas's fists clenched at his sides. "Be gentle," he blurted, surprising himself. The handler looked startled, then smiled quickly, nodding as though fearful Lucas might repeat the moment to his father. "Of course, young master. He's just stubborn sometimes." But Lucas had seen the truth in the shepherd's eyes. There was no stubbornness there, only exhaustion, only hurt. That night, Lucas lay awake, thinking about Storm. His mind returned to the limp, the flinch, the scars. His father always called Storm the rescued one, paraded him as living proof of Reinhardt compassion. But Lucas couldn't reconcile that image with the dog who trembled at sudden noises, who carried pain in every step. The boy began to notice details others ignored. The way Storm never roamed the estate freely, always accompanied by a handler. The way he hesitated at doorways, as if expecting something dangerous beyond. The way his eyes followed sounds no one else paid attention to, like whispers through the vents, or the faint rattle of chains in distant halls. Sometimes Lucas thought Storm knew things he couldn't say, bore secrets in his silence. And perhaps that was what drew the boy to him. In a house where Lucas felt invisible, overshadowed by his father's legend, Storm was another shadow, seen but not understood, celebrated but not truly cared for. One afternoon, when the courtyard was empty, Lucas slipped away from the main hall and approached Storm where he lay near the fountain. The shepherd lifted his head, ears twitching, but did not move away. Lucas crouched low, his voice hushed. "They say you're lucky," he whispered, "but you don't look lucky to me." Storm's eyes met his, steady and unblinking. For a long moment, they simply watched each other. Then the dog exhaled a low, weary sigh, and Lucas felt something stir inside him. Recognition, perhaps, or kinship. He reached out, hesitant, and let his hand hover just above Storm's fur. The shepherd didn't flinch this time. Slowly, Lucas let his fingers rest against the dog's neck, feeling the warmth, the steady beat beneath the skin. It wasn't joy, not yet, but it was permission. From then on, Lucas sought him out. He watched the shepherd move, studied his reactions, listened to the silences between his breaths. Storm was a puzzle, a riddle wrapped in scars and shadows, and though Lucas couldn't explain why, he felt the answers to his unease might live somewhere in those haunted eyes. To the world, Storm was the symbol of Victor Reinhardt's mercy. But to Lucas, Storm was proof that something about his father's story didn't add up. And in the nights to come, when the mansion fell silent and the whimpers rose again from behind the walls, Lucas would remember the shepherd's flinch, the scars hidden beneath his fur, the hollow look that no camera could ever capture. Storm wasn't just the lucky dog. He was the first crack in the mask. The mansion was never more silent than after midnight. Long after the guests left and the servants retreated to their quarters, the halls grew hollow and still, like the inside of a cathedral abandoned by its parishioners. That was when Lucas moved most freely. He liked the quiet, liked knowing his father's footsteps wouldn't echo across the marble, liked that no one watched him or expected him to smile for photographs. And those were the hours he found himself drawn most often to Storm. It began with scraps. Lucas noticed that at mealtimes, Storm was fed alongside the other dogs in the courtyard, a handler placing bowls down in neat rows, but the portions were small, too small for a dog with Storm's frame, and often the shepherd seemed too weary to eat before another dog nudged in and finished what was left. Lucas, still sitting at the dining table long after Victor and the guests had finished, began saving bits of meat and bread in his napkin. He would excuse himself quietly, pocketing the food, and slip through the shadowed corridors until he found Storm lying alone near the fountain or chained discreetly to a post. The first time Lucas knelt beside him with the scraps, Storm only stared. His dark eyes were wary, untrusting. Lucas set the food down gently and whispered, "It's okay. It's for you." Then he backed away a few steps, folding his arms tight across his chest. Storm sniffed once, twice, then lowered his head and ate, his movements slow, deliberate. When he was done, he looked back at the boy, not with gratitude exactly, but with acknowledgement. That small gesture was enough for Lucas to return the next night. Over time, the routine became a ritual. Lucas would gather food carefully, always avoiding notice, then search for Storm in the quiet corners of the estate. He'd crouch close, speaking in low tones about things he never dared say aloud in the company of adults. How the house felt too big, how the silence pressed on him at night, how he wished he had someone who listened without brushing his questions aside. Storm never answered, but he stayed, and that was enough. Sometimes Lucas sat so near that he could feel the shepherd's warmth seep into the cold marble beneath them. Sometimes he leaned against the dog's side, resting his head on the coarse fur, and for a moment the ache in his chest eased. It wasn't long before Lucas dared to break a rule. One evening, when the handlers were distracted and his father had retired with brandy to the study, Lucas unclipped Storm's leash and whispered, "Come with me." The shepherd hesitated, but when the boy tugged lightly at his collar and began walking, Storm followed, limping, but willingly. Together they crept through the winding halls until Lucas's bedroom door closed softly behind them. For the first time, Lucas had company in his room. Storm sniffed the air cautiously, then circled once before lying down near the foot of the bed. Lucas knelt beside him, pressing his palm against the dog's scarred side. "You can stay here," he whispered. "No one will know." That night, Lucas didn't feel the same crushing loneliness he usually did before sleep. He whispered stories into the dark, memories of his mother, who had left when he was too young to understand why. Moments of embarrassment at school, the way he hated the eyes in the portrait staring down at him. He told Storm about the whimpers he thought he heard in the walls, about the way the silence scared him. The shepherd didn't move, but his slow, steady breathing filled the room like a promise. For the first time in years, Lucas fell asleep without fear of nightmares. Morning brought new anxiety. Storm had to be gone before the servants noticed. Lucas rose early, nudging the shepherd awake. Storm rose stiffly, but there was no hesitation in his eyes as Lucas guided him back to the courtyard. The boy felt the weight of risk pressing on him. If his father found out, there would be consequences. But beneath that fear was something else, a quiet glow of belonging. The bond between them grew in these stolen hours. Lucas began to understand Storm's silences. The way the dog's ears twitched when a door slammed too loudly, the way he shifted uneasily at the sound of boots in the hall, the way he sometimes whimpered in his sleep, legs jerking as though running from something only he could see. Lucas would reach out then, laying a hand gently across Storm's back, whispering, "It's okay. You're safe here." He never knew if the words helped, but he whispered them anyway, as much for himself as for the dog. For in Storm's haunted stillness, Lucas saw his own reflection. The boy carried scars too, though not on his skin. They were inside, invisible, memories of being dismissed, ignored, treated as a prop for his father's carefully built legend. Like Storm, Lucas knew what it meant to be seen but not understood, valued for the image rather than the truth. And in that recognition, something unspoken passed between them. One evening, Lucas sat cross-legged on the floor of his room, the remains of his dinner laid out carefully for Storm. He watched the shepherd eat slowly, then rest his head against the boy's knee. Lucas froze at first, then smiled faintly, stroking the fur between the dog's ears. "You're the only one who listens," he whispered. Storm's tail moved, just once, brushing softly against the floor. It wasn't joy. It wasn't the carefree play of an ordinary boy and his dog. But it was something far more enduring. Two lonely souls, bound by silence, finding in each other a kind of fragile refuge. For Lucas, Storm became more than a dog. He became a confidant, a keeper of secrets, a mirror to his own quiet ache. And for Storm, Lucas was perhaps the first human in years who offered touch without command, food without demand, presence without expectation. Neither of them knew it then, but in the long nights ahead, this bond would be the one thing strong enough to lead them both into the heart of the truth and survive it. It happened on a night when the house seemed even heavier than usual, its silence pressing down like a weight Lucas couldn't shake. The boy had brought Storm into his room again, slipping him bits of meat and crusts of bread until the shepherd's breathing slowed and his eyes half closed with a weary kind of contentment. For a while, Lucas thought the night might pass in peace. But then, Storm stiffened. The change was sudden, so sharp it jolted Lucas upright. One moment the dog was lying quietly at his side, the next his body tensed like a coiled spring. His ears pricked forward, his head snapped toward the door, and a low growl rumbled in his chest. It wasn't playful, and wasn't a warning of some imagined game. This was something else, primal, raw, the sound of instinct pressed against danger. "Storm?" Lucas whispered, his hand hovering just above the dog's back. Storm ignored him, the growl deepening, vibrating through his scarred ribs. His eyes fixed not on the door to Lucas's room, but beyond it, down the hallway that curved toward the forbidden east wing. The boy followed his gaze, his throat tightening. The growl carried on for several breaths, low and steady, until Storm finally stood, His limp was pronounced, but it didn't slow the urgency in his movements. He padded to the door, claws clicking softly against the floor, and pressed his nose to the crack. His body trembled with the force of the warning that rumbled out of him. Lucas's heart raced. He had heard noises from that wing before. The faint whimpers, the scratching he told himself were pipes or old wood. But hearing Storm now, seeing the raw fear in his posture, stripped away all excuses. Dogs didn't lie. He knelt beside the shepherd, laying a hand gently against his flank. That was when he noticed them. Scars beneath the fur. Not just the deep one across the hind leg, the one Victor had pointed out proudly as a soldier's wound, but smaller marks, crisscrossing, hidden in the darker patches of Storm's coat. Some were straight and thin, like cuts from a blade. Others were circular, pocked into the skin, as though something had burned there. Lucas's stomach turned. These weren't the kind of scars left behind by a battlefield rescue. They were too precise, too repeated, too deliberate. He pulled his hand back quickly, staring at the dog as if seeing him for the first time. "What happened to you?" he whispered. Storm gave no answer, only pressed harder against the door, his body taut, ears pinned forward. The growl became a bark, sharp and startling in the quiet house. Lucas flinched, glancing toward the hall. If anyone else heard, they'd come. He placed both hands gently on Storm's shoulders, whispering, "Shh, please. They'll hear you." But the shepherd resisted, straining toward the hall, his gaze fixed on something Lucas couldn't see. The boy's chest tightened with dread. He looked down the corridor in his mind, tracing the path he'd walked so many times before, past the portraits, past the locked doors, toward that wing he'd never entered. He thought of the night he'd heard the whimpers. He thought of the scratching, the silence that followed. And now, Storm's scars. It was too much to ignore. "Is that where they are?" Lucas asked, though he wasn't sure what he meant. They, the dogs he never saw, the ghosts behind the walls, the things his father never explained. His voice cracked as he said it, the question breaking under the weight of his fear. The storm barked again, once, sharp and certain. Then he turned back to Lucas, eyes burning with something more than instinct. It was urgent. Desperation. As if the dog needed the boy to understand. Lucas swallowed hard, his small hands trembling as he clutched Storm's fur. He felt the raised ridges of scars under his fingertips, each one whispering the same truth. This was not the story his father told. This was not peace, not retirement, not rescue. Something was wrong. Terribly, unspeakably wrong. Storm's body eventually eased, the growls fading into quiet whines. He leaned into Lucas's touch, his breathing rough and uneven. The boy wrapped his arms around the dog's neck, pressing his face into the thick fur, his chest aching with questions he couldn't ask out loud. When he finally pulled back, Lucas looked once more toward the hallway. The sconces flickered low, shadows spilling across the marble like spilled ink. The locked door at the far end seemed to loom larger than ever, as though it had been waiting for him to notice. That night, when Lucas returned Storm to the courtyard before dawn, his hands still smelled faintly of fear and iron. He lay awake in bed for hours, staring at the ceiling, his mind chasing the same thought in circles. What if Father isn't saving them at all? What if he's hiding them? Storm had given his warning. And Lucas, though only 12, knew he could never forget it. It was the first tangible clue, the first undeniable sign that the image his father presented to the world was not the truth. The mansion was keeping secrets. Storm's body carried the proof. And the boy, for the first time, realized he was no longer imagining things. He was standing at the edge of something real and dangerous. The cars arrived just after noon, their engines humming low against the silence of the mountain air. Lucas watched from an upstairs window as sleek black sedans pulled into the courtyard, tires crunching against the gravel. Doors opened, and out spilled the familiar figures: reporters in fitted coats, photographers with heavy cameras slung around their necks, assistants carrying notepads and bags of equipment. Their laughter rang sharp against the stillness, a sound Lucas always thought felt out of place here, too loud, too eager. His father stood at the bottom of the steps, waiting for them. Victor Reinhardt wore his usual uniform of charm, a tailored suit, his tie knotted just so, his shoes polished to a quiet gleam. When the reporters approached, he greeted each one by name, shaking hands as if they were old friends, his smile so perfectly rehearsed, it almost seemed sincere. "Welcome, welcome," Victor said, his voice carrying easily across the courtyard. "You've come at a good time. The sun favors us today. The dogs will be eager to meet you." Lucas leaned closer to the glass, his palms pressed against the cold pane. He knew the routine. He had seen it before. This dance his father performed for cameras. It always began the same way: warmth, familiarity, the illusion of transparency. And it always ended with praise that spilled into magazines and broadcasts, painting Victor as a man too noble to question. The journalists followed him into the estate. Lucas slipped from his room and padded quietly down the stairs, careful to stay near the walls where shadows clung. He didn't want to be seen. He only wanted to watch. The tour began in the West Wing, the only part of the house ever shown to outsiders. The doors swung open to reveal a room Lucas had been in only once. A room that felt like a stage set, more than a living space. Cushions were scattered across polished floors. Toys lay neatly arranged, as though frozen mid-play. And there, waiting as if on cue, were the dogs. But not all the dogs. Only a handful, 6, maybe 7, stood in the room. They were calm, too calm, their bodies still, their eyes glassy. Lucas recognized them as the same ones always chosen for these visits. Dogs with glossy coats, dogs without visible scars, dogs that would not bark or growl at sudden movements. The reporters gasped softly, their pens already scratching, their cameras flashing. "Remarkable," one woman murmured. "They look so content." Victor's smile deepened. Here, they live as honored guests, not as tools of labor. Each one has given their life to service. It is only right they find peace in return. He moved through the room like a conductor, gesturing toward the shepherd curled on a velvet cushion, the Malinois chewing idly at a toy bone. The dogs barely reacted, as if they had been rehearsed into this stillness. Lucas's stomach twisted. He knew those dogs. He had seen handlers lead them here hours before the guests arrived, brushing their coats, cleaning their ears, slipping something into their food to keep them quiet. "Would you like to meet Storm?" Victor asked, his eyes flicking toward one of the journalists he knew would write the longest piece. "He is our pride, rescued from the battlefield, a hero among heroes." The door opened again, and Storm was led in by a handler. The shepherd moved slowly, his limp visible despite the polished presentation. Cameras clicked furiously. Storm didn't bark or wag his tail. He stood still, head slightly bowed, as though he knew the drill. Victor rested a hand on his back, smiling toward the lenses. "Magnificent, isn't he?" The journalists nodded, some smiling warmly, others jotting down notes about Reinhardt's compassion. Lucas, standing at the edge of the hall, saw something else. He saw the tightness in Storm's muscles, the way his ears twitched at the sound of camera shutters, the way his eyes darted toward the far end of the corridor, the one that led to the locked wing. The boy clenched his fists. He wanted to speak, to tell them this wasn't the whole truth. But the words lodged in his throat. He was only 12, and every time he'd tried before, his father's charm had erased him, made him invisible again. "Do you allow them outside much?" a reporter asked. Victor laughed lightly, as though the question were unnecessary. "Of course. They roam the gardens, play in the courtyards, but today, we've kept them here so you can see them more closely." Another lie. Lucas had never seen most of these dogs beyond this wing, never seen them run free in the gardens like his father claimed. The tour continued. Victor guided them past framed photographs of dogs and handlers, past plaques engraved with phrases like "loyalty beyond measure" and "duty till the end." He told stories that brought tears to some of the reporters' eyes. A shepherd who shielded a soldier from gunfire, a Malinois who sniffed out a bomb at a train station. His voice softened in just the right places, rose with passion in others. By the time he ended, the room was thick with admiration. Lucas lingered in the shadows, his jaw tight. He knew what would come next. Articles filled with praise, headlines about compassion, photographs that showed only the hand-picked few. And behind it all, silence. No mention of the locked doors, the dogs no one saw, the scars no one asked about. Storm's gaze found him once before the shepherd was led away, and Lucas felt the weight of it settle into his chest. The dog's eyes were haunted, pleading in a language only he seemed to understand. The tour ended with champagne in crystal glasses, laughter echoing through the hall. Victor shook hands again, his smile unshakable, his legend burnished once more. And Lucas, standing quietly against the wall, realized the truth with a clarity that chilled him. The world would never see what he saw. They would only see what his father wanted them to. The boy's silence deepened that day, but so did his suspicion. The cameras loved Victor Reinhardt. They adored the way he held himself, chin high, shoulders broad, voice smooth as silk. But they loved even more the image of him as a family man. Journalists always wanted proof that his compassion was not only for dogs, but for people too. That his carefully polished humanity extended into his home. And so, whenever the press visited, Victor made sure Lucas was by his side. "Stand up straight," his father whispered, adjusting the collar of Lucas's shirt with a practiced hand. "Smile when they point the camera at you. Just smile, mein Junge. That's all you need to do." Lucas nodded, though his stomach felt heavy. Smiling didn't come easily to him. It never had. And today, standing under the glare of bright studio lights that had been rolled into the drawing room, he felt smaller than ever. Reporters circled, cameras clicked, the air thick with questions and laughter. His father's hand rested firmly on his shoulder, as if to remind him that Lucas was a piece of this performance too, another prop in the stagecraft of Reinhardt compassion. They were standing beside 3 of the dogs chosen for the day's display. One, a Malinois with sharp, alert ears, sat calmly at Victor's feet. Another, a pale shepherd, panted softly in the heat of the lamps. The third dog stood nearest to Lucas, a large sable-coated shepherd whose fur had been brushed to a glossy shine. The cameras pivoted, capturing the boy and the dog together. "Stand closer," Victor murmured. "Put your hand on him." "Yes, like that." Lucas obeyed, pressing his palm lightly against the shepherd's side. The fur was warm beneath his hand, but beneath the warmth he felt something else. Stiffness, a subtle swelling. He glanced down, eyes narrowing. The dog shifted slightly, and the fur parted just enough for Lucas to see the thin line of black sutures running along its ribcage. They were fresh, too fresh. The skin around them looked raw, the stitches pulled tight. Someone had brushed fur over the wound, trying to hide it, but up close it was impossible to miss. Lucas's breath caught. This was no scar from long ago, no relic of a battle fought years before. This was new, painful, the kind of wound that should have kept the dog resting quietly, not standing still for cameras. He looked up at his father instinctively, but Victor was busy smiling at a question from a journalist, his laugh loud and rehearsed. A photographer leaned in, lens focusing on Lucas and the shepherd. "That's perfect," the man called. "Young Lucas and his father's rescue. Such a bond." The lights flared. Lucas tried to smile, but his lips trembled. The truth he had just seen, it burned inside him, rising like bile. He wanted to step back, to shout that this wasn't right, that the dog was hurt, stitched up like an object patched together for display. But his father's hand pressed gently, firmly, against his shoulder, anchoring him in place. So he smiled. It was a weak, uncertain thing, nothing like Victor's dazzling grin. His eyes darted toward the sutures again, then back to the lens. A camera caught it, the flicker of unease across a boy's face, the hesitation in his smile. For a heartbeat, Lucas feared it would show, that the world would see his discomfort broadcast in glossy spreads and television interviews. But no one noticed. The journalists saw only what they wanted to see. The billionaire, the boy, the noble dogs. "Adorable," someone murmured. "He's following in your footsteps, Victor. The next Reinhardt philanthropist." Victor chuckled, squeezing Lucas's shoulder. "He has a good heart. Yes. He cares for them as much as I do." The words stung. Lucas lowered his eyes quickly, afraid that if he looked up again, the tears threatening his vision would betray him. He forced the smile back onto his face, but it felt like wearing a mask that was 2 sizes too tight. The dog beside him shifted again, a faint whine escaping its throat. It was so soft that most in the room didn't hear, but Lucas did. The sound slid straight into his chest, sharp as a blade. He wanted to kneel to comfort the shepherd, to tell the cameras the truth about the wound hidden beneath its fur, but he remained frozen, trapped under the weight of his father's expectations. When the photo session ended, the handlers led the dogs out quickly, their leashes short and firm. Lucas's hand lingered in the air, as if reaching for something he couldn't hold. The image of those stitches seared into his mind, refusing to fade. Afterward, as champagne glasses clinked and reporters scribbled glowing notes, Lucas slipped to the edge of the room. He pressed his back against the wall, the noise of laughter swirling around him like static. His jaw clenched, his small fists tightening at his sides. It was one thing to feel unease in the silence of the mansion, to imagine whimpers in the night. But now he had seen it, evidence carved into flesh. Proof that the story of peace and retirement was a lie. He glanced across the room at his father, who was raising his glass in a toast, his smile radiant, his charm unbreakable. The journalists raised their glasses too, their eyes shining with admiration. Not one of them noticed the boy in the shadows, or the truth burning behind his forced smile. That evening, long after the guests had gone, Lucas lay awake in his bed. The image of the stitches haunted him, looping endlessly in his mind. He thought of Storm, of the scars beneath his fur, of the growls toward the locked door. And now this. Another dog, another wound, hidden behind a curtain of lies. For the first time, Lucas understood that his silence would not protect him. If he kept pretending, if he kept smiling for the cameras, he would become just another part of the story his father wanted the world to see. But inside, a new resolve began to stir. Something was broken in that house, and he could no longer pretend he didn't see it. The estate always felt different after the guests had gone. By day it was a theater, every room polished for display, every dog carefully chosen for performance. But at night, the glamour dissolved, and the house seemed to exhale, revealing its weight in long shadows and restless silence. That night, Lucas slipped out into the garden, after the staff had cleared the last champagne flutes and dimmed the chandeliers. The air was cool, damp with the scent of clipped grass, and stone warmed from the day's sun. Above him, the stars pressed close, sharp against the velvet sky. The boy tugged his sweater tighter around him as he wandered the path toward the courtyard fountain, where he often found Storm. The shepherd was there, lying in the grass with his head low between his paws. At first glance he looked almost peaceful, but then Lucas noticed the tautness in his body, the alert stillness of his ears. The Storm wasn't resting. He was watching. The boy followed his gaze and saw where it led. The far edge of the garden, where the walls of the mansion stretched high and cold, their windows dark. Beyond that stone facade lay the east wing, the part of the house always locked, always forbidden. Storm's eyes didn't waver from it. His ears twitched forward, his tail stiffened. A low growl hummed in his chest, soft but steady. Lucas froze, his breath catching. He had seen Storm like this before, tense at doors, growling at walls. But here, in the stillness of the garden, with nothing but moonlight between them, the warning felt louder, more urgent. He crouched beside the dog, resting his hand gently on the shepherd's shoulder. "What are you looking at?" he whispered. "What's in there?" The Storm didn't move. His gaze burned toward the locked wing, as if it contained something only he could smell, something that had seared itself into his memory. The boy's hand slid along Storm's side, tracing the raised scars beneath the fur. He thought of the stitches he'd seen earlier that day, hidden beneath the coat of the shepherd paraded for the cameras. He thought of the whimpers he had heard in the walls, and now this. Storm, staring unblinking at the place that had always felt wrong. Lucas swallowed hard, his chest tight. "What are you trying to tell me?" His voice was barely a breath, but it trembled with need. Storm answered with another growl, his ears still fixed forward. Then he glanced up at Lucas, their eyes meeting in the silver wash of moonlight. For the briefest moment, the boy felt the world fall away, the cameras, the parties, the careful lies of his father. It was just him and the dog, two shadows bound together by the weight of something they couldn't yet speak. The shepherd lowered his head again, pressing his nose to the grass, then back toward the mansion, then back to Lucas. A signal, a plea. Lucas's throat burned. He wanted to promise Storm he understood, that he would find out what lay behind those locked doors. But he was only 12, and the mansion was a fortress of secrets far larger than him. Still, something inside him shifted. His questions were no longer the idle curiosities of a boy. They were sharper now, edged with purpose. He leaned closer, pressing his forehead lightly against Storm's. "I'll listen," he whispered. "Whatever you're trying to say, I'll listen." The dog exhaled a deep, weary sound, and for a moment he seemed to soften beneath Lucas's touch. The boy stroked his neck slowly, steadying his own breath. The bond between them deepened in that silence, rooted not in words but in something older, something instinctive. The quiet recognition of pain, the unspoken promise of loyalty. From the garden, Lucas looked once more at the east wing. The windows there were black, no light escaping, yet he could almost feel the presence of what waited inside. The thought sent a shiver through him. He rose to his feet slowly, his hand still resting on Storm's back. "I'll find out," he said again, firmer this time, as though speaking it aloud made it real. Storm stood with him, limping slightly as he shifted, but his body leaned into the boy's side, steadying him. Together, they turned away from the wing, retreating toward the fountain's quiet trickle. The night pressed close around them, heavy with secrets. Lucas's chest ached with the weight of what he knew now. His father's image was not truth, and Storm's scars were not accidents. The mansion held something dark, and the shepherd, this so-called lucky dog, was trying to show him the way. That night, when Lucas finally returned to his bed, he carried the image of Storm in the garden with him, the dog's gaze fixed on the locked wing, his growl low and steady. It echoed in Lucas's mind long after he closed his eyes, a warning he could no longer ignore. And as sleep pulled at him, one thought remained, sharp and certain. Storm was not just a companion, he was a guide, leading Lucas toward the truth his father had buried behind stone walls and silken lies. The boy was no longer simply suspicious, he was determined. The storm arrived just past midnight. It began as a low rumble in the mountains, a vibration that rolled across the valley and made the glass chandeliers in the mansion tremble on their chains. Then the wind came, rushing down from the peaks, rattling shutters and bending the garden trees, until their branches clawed at the windows. By the time the rain arrived, it fell in sheets, slashing against the stone walls, drumming on the slate roof like 1,000 beating fists. Lucas lay awake in bed, his heart already restless before the storm began. He liked the sound of rain, liked the way it filled the silence of the house with something real. But tonight, the storm felt different. The thunder shook the floor beneath him, and the flashes of lightning cast strange shapes across his walls. The portraits of long-dead Reinhardts, framed in gold, seemed to come alive in the strobing light, their eyes following him even in the privacy of his room. Then, beneath the roar of rain and thunder, Lucas heard it, the faintest sound, threading through the chaos like a hidden voice. A whimper. He sat up, his breath catching. For a moment he thought it might be Storm, but the shepherd wasn't in his room tonight. Lucas had been too nervous to sneak him in after the journalist's visit, afraid of being caught. The sound wasn't near. It was distant, muffled, almost carried by the storm itself. He pressed his ear against the wall. The whimper came again, high, pained, followed by a scrape, like claws dragging weakly against metal. The storm had stirred the house awake, and in its fury, it had revealed the whispers Lucas had half convinced himself he'd imagined. He slipped from his bed, pulling his robe tight around him. The marble floor was freezing under his bare feet, but he didn't care. He opened his door carefully, wincing at the groan of hinges, and stepped into the hallway. The sconces flickered in the draught, their flames bending low. The air smelled of wet stone, the storm forcing its way in through unseen cracks. Lucas padded down the corridor, each step loud in his own ears. He paused often, straining to hear. Between the thunderclaps, the cries were there again, faint, desperate, rising and falling as if carried through the vents that ran like veins through the mansion's bones. He followed them, past the portraits, past the grand staircase, where the lightning flashed through tall windows, painting the marble in white light. His heart pounded, but he couldn't stop. The cries tugged at him like a thread, pulling him deeper into the house. The sound led him toward the east wing, the forbidden part of the mansion. The closer he came, the more certain he became that the cries were not echoes of the storm. They were real, alive, too raw to be anything else. At the end of a long corridor, Lucas stopped. The walls trembled with the thunder, and for a moment he thought he might turn back, retreat to the safety of his bed. But then the sound came again, several cries this time, layered over one another, weak and broken. They carried through a vent above his head, the metal vibrating faintly with the force of them. Lucas reached up, pressing his palm flat against the vent. Cold air brushed his skin. The cries shivered through his hand, undeniable. His stomach twisted. He wanted to call out, to say something into the darkness, but fear sealed his throat. Instead, he whispered into the storm, barely audible even to himself. "I hear you." Another flash of lightning lit the hallway, and for an instant Lucas thought he saw movement in the shadows ahead. He froze, his breath shallow. But when the thunder crashed and the light was gone, nothing remained but the endless stretch of stone and silence. He backed away from the vent slowly, his heart hammering. He had proof now, not the kind he could hold in his hands, but the kind he could no longer deny. The cries were real. There were dogs behind those walls, dogs that were not the calm, brushed, perfect ones his father showed to the world. These were different, hurt, hidden, and afraid. The boy turned and hurried back down the corridor, his bare feet slapping lightly against marble. The storm masked his steps, thunder and rain swallowing any noise he made. By the time he reached his room again, his chest ached from the force of his breathing. He shut the door quickly and leaned against it, pressing both hands flat to the wood as if to keep something out. His robe clung to him with damp from the air, and his hair stuck to his forehead. He felt smaller than ever in that vast house, a single boy with a secret too large to carry. Outside, the storm raged on. But inside, Lucas lay back in bed, eyes wide open, listening still. Every whimper he'd heard replayed in his head, over and over, until he felt them in his own chest, as if his heart had borrowed their cries. He pulled the covers tight around him, whispering into the dark, "I won't forget." The storm would pass. Morning would come, and with it, the polished lies of his father's world. But Lucas knew now that something lived in those locked rooms, something chained and suffering. The wind had carried their voices to him, and he had heard. And once you heard a cry like that, you could never unhear it. The storm had not fully passed when Lucas crept from his room again. The house still groaned with the weight of wind, the windows rattling in their frames, but the thunder had softened into distant rumbles. What lingered now was the echo of what he had heard. The cries carried through the vents, too sharp, too real to dismiss as dream or imagination. He couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw dogs' faces pressed against iron bars, heard claws scraping at metal, felt their desperation prickling his skin like static. Finally, unable to bear the silence of pretending, he slipped back into the corridor. This time, he wasn't alone. Storm padded beside him, summoned by some wordless understanding. The shepherd had appeared at his door not long after the storm quieted, his nose nudging against the wood until Lucas let him in. The boy didn't question how Storm had freed himself from his chain. He only knew that the dog's presence made his own footsteps steadier. The mansion was darker now, the sconces along the walls guttering low, flames nearly burned out. Shadows stretched tall and thin across the marble, swaying in rhythm with the storm outside. Lucas moved slowly, his bare feet whispering against the cold floor, Storm limping at his side. The cries were weaker now, faint enough that Lucas had to stop often, pressing his ear against the walls to be sure. Storm didn't need to stop. His body was tense, ears pricked forward, nose working as he followed a trail Lucas couldn't sense. Each time the boy hesitated, Storm nudged him onward with a push of his shoulder, his eyes fixed ahead with grim certainty. The corridor narrowed as they approached the east wing. Lucas had never come this far before. The servants always steered him away, his father's voice always sharp if he lingered. Now, standing in its shadow, he understood why. The air itself felt heavier here, colder. The silence was different too, not empty, but full, like a held breath, waiting to break. And then he saw it. At the very end of the corridor, half hidden behind a tapestry of a hunting scene, stood a door unlike the others in the mansion. Where most were polished oak, carved with flourishes, this one was iron, dark, rough, its surface scarred with scratches that gleamed faintly in the flicker of light. The frame around it was thick stone, as if the house itself had been built to conceal it. Lucas froze, his heart thudding in his chest. He hadn't expected to find it so easily, hadn't truly believed the mansion would reveal its secret. But there it was, undeniable. Storm moved ahead, pushing the tapestry aside with his nose. He pressed close to the iron door, his body rigid, ears pinned flat. A low growl rolled from his chest, deeper than any Lucas had heard before, vibrating against the silence like a warning bell. His nose pressed against the seam where the door met the stone, sniffing furiously, then whining as though the smell itself carried pain. Lucas stepped closer, his fingers trembling as he reached out. The iron was cold beneath his touch, colder than the marble floor. He pressed his palm flat against it, then pulled back quickly. It almost felt alive, humming faintly with the vibration of sound. And then he heard it. Scratch, scratch, scratch. The noise came from the other side, faint but unmistakable. The desperate scrabbling of claws against metal. Lucas's breath hitched. He leaned closer, pressing his ear to the door. At first, all he heard was the storm outside, wind whining through the cracks of the old house. But then, beneath it, came the sound again. Claws, dragging, then stopping, followed by a soft, broken whimper. "God," Lucas whispered, his voice breaking. Storm barked suddenly, sharp and explosive, his body slamming against the door with surprising force for his limp frame. He clawed at the seam, growling, barking again, his eyes blazing with urgency. "Stop!" Lucas hissed, glancing down the corridor in panic. If anyone heard, if his father or the handlers came, they would know he had seen too much. He dropped to his knees, wrapping his arms around Storm's neck, trying to quiet him. "Shh! They'll hear us." But Storm's body trembled violently in his arms, the growl refusing to fade. His nose pressed hard against the iron, then back toward Lucas, then against the iron again, as if to say, "Look, listen, believe." The boy's chest ached. He wanted to flee, to run back to the safety of his room and bury the truth under blankets, but he couldn't. Not anymore. The scars on Storm's body, the sutures on the shepherd shown to reporters, the cries in the storm, they all converged here, behind this door. Lucas pressed his ear once more to the iron. The scratching had stopped, but the silence was worse. He could almost imagine the dogs inside, pressed against the walls, too weak now to make noise. The thought made his throat burn with tears he refused to shed. Storm whimpered beside him, his head bowed, his body leaning into the boy, as if sharing the weight of what lay beyond. Lucas wrapped his arms tighter around the shepherd's neck, burying his face in the coarse fur. "What's in there?" he whispered. His words came out shaky, torn between fear and determination. "What is he hiding?" Storm didn't answer, but his body gave the reply Lucas already knew. His father wasn't saving these dogs. He was hiding them, using them. Lucas pulled back slowly, his eyes fixed on the iron door. The storm outside boomed once more, rattling the windows, shaking the floor, but the sound only seemed to echo what already roared in his chest. This was the place the mansion had been trying to conceal. This was the place his father never wanted him to see. And though he didn't yet know how, Lucas felt the quiet certainty settle inside him. Someday, he would open that door. The iron door loomed before him, a black wound in the marble corridor. Lucas stood frozen. Storm pressed against his leg, the shepherd's growl still trembling through the air, like a thread stretched to its breaking point. For a long moment, the boy only stared. His heart beat so hard, he thought it might shake the air itself. He didn't want to move closer. He didn't want to know. And yet something stronger than fear pushed him forward. A pull in his chest, the echo of the cries he'd heard in the storm. Slowly, Lucas ran his hand along the edge of the doorframe. His fingers brushed stone, then cold iron. He searched, trembling, until he found it. A sliver of space where the door didn't meet the wall completely. A crack, thin as a blade. His breath caught. He crouched, pressing his eye to it. At first there was nothing but darkness, heavy, suffocating, as though the room itself had swallowed light. He blinked, forcing his eyes to adjust. Shapes began to emerge, shadows within shadows. Bars, thick and vertical, lined in rows. And behind them, movement. A dog. No, several. They were huddled in cramped cages, their bodies reduced to bone and skin. Their fur was matted, patchy, some raw with sores. Chains clinked faintly as they shifted, too weak to stand fully. The air that seeped through the crack reeked faintly of rot, of damp straw, of something acrid and chemical. Lucas's stomach lurched. Then he saw the eyes. Dozens of them, glimmering in the dark, reflecting the faint sliver of light from the corridor. They stared at him, wide and unblinking, hollow yet piercing. Some were dull, sunken with exhaustion. Others burned with something closer to panic. They weren't the calm, polished dogs paraded before cameras. These were creatures pushed to the edge of survival, their spirits hanging on by threads. One dog lifted its head, a shepherd with a muzzle rubbed raw from years of pressing against bars. It looked directly at Lucas, and in that gaze he felt the weight of everything. Suffering, silence, pleading. The boy jerked back, his breath shattering in his chest. Storm barked sharply, slamming his body against the door as if to break it open. The sound exploded in the corridor, echoing off the stone. Lucas's hands shot out, grabbing at the shepherd's fur, desperate to quiet him. "Stop, Storm. Please." His voice cracked with panic. "They'll hear us." But his own words trembled with the same fear rattling through his bones. The images burned into his mind, refusing to release him. Cages, chains, those eyes. He staggered back from the door, nearly tripping over his own feet. His vision swam, his throat tight. He wanted to scream but couldn't. His body felt too small, too fragile to hold the enormity of what he had just seen. The house groaned with the storm outside, thunder booming overhead, but the sound inside was louder. The hammering of his heart, the scrape of chains behind the door, Storm's furious barking. Lucas turned and ran. His feet slapped against marble, echoing down the corridor. Storm followed, his claws scraping loudly, his breath ragged. The boy didn't stop until he reached the safety of his own room, slamming the door behind him, pressing his back against it as though the horrors he'd glimpsed might follow. His chest heaved. His robe clung to him, damp with sweat. He slid to the floor, pressing both hands against his face, trying to block the images. But they were there, branded into his mind. Skeletal dogs, chained in darkness, their eyes meeting his through the sliver of light. He whispered into his palms, voice shaking, "It's true. Oh God, it's true." Storm paced the room, still growling low, restless. He returned to the boy's side, pressing his nose against Lucas's knee, a steady anchor in the chaos. Lucas clung to him, burying his face in the dog's fur, trembling. For weeks, for months, he had carried suspicion like a quiet ember in his chest. But tonight, it had ignited into fire. No lie, no charm, no smile from his father could erase what he had seen with his own eyes. The sanctuary wasn't real. The rescues weren't real. The mansion held a prison. And Lucas, though only 12, now carried a secret too heavy for silence. He clung tighter to Storm, whispering into the coarse fur, "I'll get you out. All of you. I swear." But even as he said it, fear coiled inside him. Because promises were easy to make in the safety of a dark room, carrying them out, that would mean stepping into the very shadows his father had built. The boy shut his eyes, the storm roaring outside, the memory of those eyes searing through the dark. Sleep would not come, not anymore. The house was silent, yet Lucas couldn't breathe. His room, usually a haven of shadows and posters, felt suddenly hostile. Every corner whispered reminders of the night he had witnessed. Metal cages, muffled whimpers, Storm's amber eyes cutting through the dark. He lay stiff under the covers, eyes burning from tears he refused to let fall. Sleep didn't come. Instead, fragments returned in jagged bursts. The click of locks, Victor's voice rising in command, the smell of rust and fear. He would turn his face into the pillow, but behind his eyelids, the cages always reappeared. Storm lay curled near the bed, breathing steady. Occasionally, the shepherd's ears twitched, as though he too were haunted. Once, Lucas whispered, "I can't stop it." And the dog stirred, padding over to rest his chin against the mattress. Lucas gripped the coarse fur, grounding himself against the panic clawing inside his chest. Hours crawled by. The red digits of the clock burned 2:17, then 3:46. The house remained wrapped in silence, but Lucas's mind roared. He couldn't tell anyone. Not his mother, not a teacher, not the police. Adults wouldn't believe a boy. Or worse, they'd turn on Storm, seeing him as just another scarred dog from that place. By dawn, Lucas sat hunched at his desk, face pale, eyes hollow. An old notebook lay open before him, pages yellowed from disuse. His hand trembled as he lifted a pen. He didn't plan the words. They spilled. There are cages, dozens. The dogs cry when no one listens. The locks smell like blood. Victor smiles when they hurt. He stared at the shaky lines, throat tight. It felt dangerous, wrong, like placing his hand on a wound and pressing, but it was also the first moment he could breathe. Storm shifted, rising to sit by the desk. Lucas glanced down. "If I write it, it's real," he whispered. The shepherd's gaze held his, steady and unflinching, as if to say, "Then write it all." So he did. He filled the pages with fragments, sketches of cages, scribbled floor plans from memory, half-heard phrases Victor had barked. The handwriting grew messy, ink smudging where his hand shook. But it didn't matter. Every mark on the page was proof he hadn't imagined it. At times, his vision blurred. He would pause, rub his eyes, press his palm against his chest where it hurt most. Then he would continue. When the sun crept through the curtains, Lucas finally set the pen down. The notebook was no longer empty. It held the truth, raw, jagged, imperfect, but alive. He leaned back, exhausted. Storm pressed against his knee, and Lucas dropped a hand to the shepherd's head. "We can't tell anyone yet," he murmured, "but we won't forget. Not ever." Storm's slow blink was answer enough. That morning at school, Lucas moved like a ghost. Teachers spoke, classmates laughed, but the world passed him as though he were underwater. His notebook stayed hidden in his bag, heavy as iron. At lunch, he slipped outside to the edge of the yard, where the noise faded. He opened the book again, tracing his messy handwriting. He added new lines, shorter now, sharper. They break them to make them obey. Storm never bowed. I won't either. He closed the cover quickly when the bell rang, but as he walked back inside, there was something steadier in his step. That night the ritual returned. The nightmares pressed close, but Lucas was ready. He sat at the desk, Storm at his side, and opened the book to a blank page. This time he wrote less about cages and more about promises. "I'll keep a record. I'll gather proof. One day, someone will have to listen." He began sketching Storm, not the broken creature from the cages, but the dog who stood guard by his bed. The lines were clumsy, the proportions wrong. But when he finished, the page breathed with life. Storm climbed onto the rug beside him, curling with a heavy sigh. Lucas whispered, "You're my witness," before returning to his pen. The notebook grew page by page. Over the next week, Lucas filled it with maps, overheard whispers, even his own questions. Why did no one stop this? Who else knows? Some nights, when the weight threatened to crush him, he wrote single words: hurt, silence, hope. They were anchors, fragments, to remind himself why he couldn't turn away. Each morning, he tucked the book beneath loose floorboards under his bed. It was dangerous, he knew. If Victor ever discovered it, Lucas refused to finish the thought. But he also knew this. Silence was another kind of cage, and he refused to live in one. On the 7th night, storm clouds rolled across the sky. Rain tapped against the window, steady as a drumbeat. Lucas sat at his desk, the notebook open, his hand hovering. For the first time, he didn't know what to write. The fear pressed harder tonight. What if it was useless? What if the words never left these pages? Storm whined softly, rising to nudge his arm. Lucas looked down into those amber eyes, scarred, fierce, unbroken. The boy inhaled sharply, steadied his hand, and wrote, "I will not be silent. For every cage, for every dog, for Storm. He underlined the last word, the ink cutting deep into the paper. When he set the pen down, something inside him shifted. The fear was still there, but beneath it burned a new resolve. He closed the notebook gently, as though sealing a pact. Sliding it under the floorboards, he whispered, "One day, we'll use this. One day, it'll matter." Storm circled once, then settled at his feet. Lucas crawled into bed, and for the first time since the night of the raid, sleep found him. The diary had begun as desperation, but it was becoming something more, a ledger of injustice, a blueprint of resistance. And though Lucas couldn't see the future, he felt it. The pages would not remain hidden forever. Storm, ever watchful, seemed to sense it too. As dawn touched the window, the shepherd lifted his head, ears pricked, as if listening to the sound of chains breaking somewhere far away. And Lucas dreamed, not of cages, but of gates swinging open. The storm outside had passed, but Lucas's chest still carried the same restless thunder. All night he had rehearsed the words, his heart tightening each time he pictured his father's face. Now, standing in the grand study with its walls of leather-bound books and polished oak, he felt small, like a trespasser in his own home. Victor sat by the fire, its glow painting sharp angles across his face. He looked less like a father and more like a figure carved from stone, immovable, unreadable. A glass of brandy gleamed in his hand, catching the light like an ember. Storm, the shepherd, lay pressed to Lucas's leg, ears twitching at every creak of the manor. "Father," Lucas said, his voice thin but sharp enough to pierce the crackle of flames. Victor lifted his gaze. His eyes were winter ice, calm, but hiding currents beneath. "Yes, my son?" "I was walking through the east corridor," Lucas began. His throat tightened. "I found a door, the iron one. I heard something inside, scratching, whining." He swallowed hard. "Dogs. There are dogs locked away down there, aren't there?" The fire popped, but otherwise the room fell still. Victor rose, each movement slow, deliberate, like a predator deciding how to close in. He poured another drink, as if the question were nothing more than a curiosity. "Curiosity," he murmured, "is a dangerous trait." Storm stiffened, a low growl in his chest. "You've always had such an imagination," Victor went on, his smile a mask of charm. "Like your mother. You mustn't let it run away with you." "I saw things," Lucas insisted, though his chest felt crushed. "Shadows moving. I know what I heard. You can't—" "Lucas!" Victor's tone sliced sharper than any shout. The boy froze. Victor set his glass down and placed a hand on his shoulder, gentle in appearance, but heavy with warning. "There are matters you are not ready to understand. One day, perhaps, but not now." He opened a velvet box on the desk. Inside gleamed a silver pocket watch, intricate and expensive. "I had this crafted for you," Victor said smoothly. "A boy becoming a man deserves something to mark the journey." Lucas's stomach churned. He wanted to scream, to knock it away. Instead, trembling, he closed the box. Victor's smile deepened, satisfied. He leaned close, his breath tinged with brandy. "There are doors, Lucas, that must stay closed, for your own good. If you value peace, you'll leave them be." The words were not advice. They were a threat. Storm pressed against Lucas's leg, his amber eyes never leaving Victor. Lucas whispered. "I understand," though the words tasted bitter. Victor turned back to the fire, already dismissing him. "Good boy," he murmured. Lucas left the study with the watchbox in hand, feeling its weight like a chain. Behind his father's smile, he knew the truth. Victor wasn't ignorant of what lay behind that door. He was guarding it. That night, Lucas couldn't stop shaking. The rain outside had dwindled to a drizzle, leaving the estate drenched in silence. He crept down the hall, Storm padding behind him, their footsteps hushed. The office door loomed before him. Forbidden. Always locked. Always occupied late into the night. Now, it stood silent. The brass handle was cold under his palm. He turned it slowly. The hinges groaned, and Lucas slipped inside. Storm stayed at the door, leaving it ajar for escape. The air smelled of ink, leather, and something sharper, chemicals masked beneath cologne. A desk stood in perfect order, save for a decanter of brandy and a stack of unopened letters. But against the far wall loomed a locked filing cabinet. Lucas's heart raced. He knew where the keys were, hanging by the bookshelf. With trembling fingers, he fit the right one into the lock. The drawer opened with a metallic sigh. Inside, folders stamped with codes, E37, K12, R48. He pulled one free. Photographs slipped into his lap, dogs with ribs showing through skin, eyes clouded with exhaustion. Notes scrawled in Victor's unmistakable hand. Endurance threshold. Survival beyond 72 hours. Injectable serum. Each page was worse than the last, turning lives into statistics. Storm whimpered low, as if echoing Lucas's heartbeat. Lucas reached for another file. Its label read, "Shipment Schedules." Inside, manifests of drugs, routed through ports, warehouses, and his stomach dropped, the family estate listed as a waypoint. The floor creaked. Lucas froze. Footsteps approached. He shoved the folder back, hands shaking so badly the papers spilled across the floor. Storm's ears shot up, body rigid. The doorknob rattled. Panic surged. Lucas scrambled to gather the pages as the door opened. A servant's silhouette appeared. "Sir?" Storm moved first. He padded across the room, nudged a porcelain vase from the table. It shattered. The servant gasped and hurried toward the noise. Lucas ducked behind the desk, clutching a stray page to his chest. The servant muttered, sweeping up shards. Draft must have knocked it. Storm wagged his tail innocently. Shaking her head, she left, closing the door behind her. Silence thickened. Lucas pressed his forehead to the paper, trying to steady himself. He returned the files to the drawer, locked it, and slid the keys back onto their hook. But he didn't leave empty-handed. The page clutched to his chest bore a table of numbers, a code, and a port address. Proof. He tucked it inside his shirt. In the hall, Lucas leaned against the wall, trembling. He had crossed a threshold tonight. His father's empire was built on cruelty, and Lucas now held evidence of it. If Victor discovered his betrayal, the boy would not be safe under this roof again. Storm pressed against his leg, steady, grounding. Lucas clung to him, whispering, "He knows. He knows everything." Sleep would not come. Lucas sat on his bed, the shadows long against the walls, Storm curled at his feet. The images haunted him, the cages, the charts, his father's calm smile hiding fangs. His hands shook as he whispered, "If I stay quiet, I'm no better than them." The words startled him. Saying them aloud made the weight heavier. Storm placed his chin on Lucas's knee, warm and steady. Lucas stroked his head. "You knew, didn't you? You saw everything too. And if I don't stop him, maybe one day it'll be you in those cages." Storm stiffened, then licked Lucas's cheek. Slow, deliberate. Agreement. Tears blurred Lucas's vision. "I'm scared," he admitted. "I don't know who to trust, but I can't let them keep suffering." He crossed to his desk, pulled out the small leather-bound journal he'd been keeping. Sketches of cages, overheard fragments, secret notes. He opened to a blank page. His hand shook, but kept moving. "Tonight, I made a vow. I will not stay silent. I will find help. Even if the truth destroys me, it will not destroy them. The dogs deserve freedom. Storm deserves freedom. I will not let my father's shadow be the end of them." The words sprawled, jagged, angry, alive. When he finished, he underlined the final sentence. His breath came in shudders, as if he'd just run miles. For the first time, something burned inside him, stronger than fear. Resolve. Storm padded over and set a paw on the open page, sealing it. Lucas let out a shaky laugh. "All right," he whispered. "It's you and me. We'll find a way." But the vow chilled him. Finding help meant trusting someone beyond these walls. It meant risking discovery, risking Victor's wrath. He looked out the window. Beyond the locked gates and smiling lies, there had to be someone who would listen. Someone who cared enough to act. "I'll find them," Lucas said, clutching the journal to his chest. "I won't let you down, Storm. I won't let them down." Storm's tail thumped once, steady as a heartbeat. Lucas slid the journal beneath his pillow, lay down, and rested a hand on Storm's back. Sleep did not come quickly, but for the first time, he didn't fight it. His chest still carried dread, but also resolve. In the silence of night, Lucas had chosen his path. The study smelled faintly of leather, dust, and the perfume of old ink. Lucas sat hunched at the desk, his small frame dwarfed by mahogany. The glow of the computer screen carved sharp shadows across his face. Storm lay by the door, ears alert, body coiled in readiness, as though sensing the gravity of what Lucas was about to do. For days, the vow whispered into Storm's fur had burned in his chest. He had sworn not to stay silent, not to let cages remain full, not to let cries echo unanswered. But acting meant consequences his 12-year-old mind could barely grasp. He opened the email client. To anonymous tip at countyjustice.org. Subject: urgent. Evidence of animal cruelty and illegal activity. The cursor blinked, insistent. Lucas pulled his notebook close, scuffed. Pages filled with cramped handwriting and sketches of cages, chains, codes copied from his father's files. One page showed Storm drawn twice, once chained and gaunt, once free beside Lucas. His throat tightened. This diary wasn't just notes, it was the truth. He began typing. There is a hidden kennel on the Victor estate. Dogs are tested. Injections. Beatings. Endurance trials. I found files with codes, maybe transport schedules. Please investigate before it is too late. His hands hovered. He was accusing his father, the man who commanded silence with a glance. If this was traced, there would be no going back. Storm whined softly, steady eyes urging courage. Lucas scanned drawings, copied fragments, and attached them. His pulse pounded as the progress bar crept forward. Footsteps in the corridor froze him. Storm's ears flicked, but the steps faded. Lucas exhaled and clicked. Send. The message vanished into cyberspace, leaving relief tangled with dread. He deleted the evidence, cleared drafts and history, though he knew it wasn't foolproof. Storm padded over, resting his head on Lucas's knee. Lucas whispered, "If they come for me, don't let them win." Storm's tail thumped once in reply. The study looked unchanged when he slipped out, but Lucas knew a line had been crossed. Back in his room, he pressed his forehead to Storm's. Someone knows now. Someone will come. Yet doubt gnawed. What if no one believed him? What if his father already owned the authorities? He curled into Storm's neck, clinging to the only anchor he had. Silence was no longer an option. 3 days later, the reply came. Lucas had been refreshing his inbox obsessively. Finally, the subject appeared. Regarding your message. Dear sender, the local police department takes all claims seriously. After reviewing your attached materials, it appears to be a fictional account. Please refrain from misleading reports. Future false reports may result in consequences. Lucas read it once, twice. The words blurred. Fictional account. Misleading. Consequences. Storm nudged his elbow, but Lucas shoved the chair back and collapsed against the dog's fur, shaking with silent sobs. He had risked everything, and they thought he was a child with too much imagination. To the authorities, he wasn't a witness, just a boy. Invisible. He reread the warning. Consequences. They hadn't just dismissed him. They had threatened him. "Why don't they believe me?" he whispered. Storm blinked slowly, steady and grounding, but Lucas's chest still felt hollow. His father's shadow stretched too far. The world outside had confirmed it. No one would listen. Yet beneath despair, a stubborn ember glowed, the same ember that had made him press send, that had filled notebooks with sketches, that had whispered, "Do not stop." "They won't listen," Lucas told Storm that night, clutching the shepherd's paw beneath the blanket. "But I won't stop." The vow stayed steady, even through tears. Hours later, he sat again at the desk, staring at the keyboard where his hope had collapsed. Tears blurred the screen. Storm's eyes glowed steadily in the dark. "They don't believe me," Lucas said hoarsely. "Maybe Father's right. Maybe I'm too small." But then his gaze met Storm's. The German shepherd who had never doubted him, who had stood guard in silence, who had risked distraction to shield him. Lucas buried his hand in Storm's fur. "I can't stop. If I stop, no one will ever know. And if no one knows, it'll never end." Words alone weren't enough. Adults could dismiss sketches, shred letters, laugh at a boy's diary. But proof, cold, undeniable proof, they couldn't ignore. Lucas's heart raced. "We'll film it," he whispered. "We'll show them everything." Storm tilted his head. Lucas pressed on, firmer now. "If I can record the files, maybe even catch Father talking, then they'll have to listen." Fear churned. Sneaking into the office once had nearly exposed him. Doing it again, phone in hand, felt like stepping into a lion's den with raw meat. Victor's cold smile flashed in memory, that practiced mask hiding teeth. If he caught Lucas with a camera, this would not end in silence. Storm pressed closer, laying his head against Lucas's knee. Lucas stroked his ears, finding courage in steady warmth. "You'll help me. You always do." He pulled his notebook again, sketching feverishly. He redrew the office layout, marked cabinets, noted the hidden drawer, even the small window overlooking the garden, a possible escape. When finished, the page resembled less a child's doodle and more a soldier's map. Next, the tool. Lucas lifted his phone in the dim light. The camera wasn't perfect, but it could capture what mattered. Files, voices, cages, proof. He turned it over in his hands, imagining it slipping, crashing to the floor under Victor's icy stare. His stomach flipped. He'd need to be clever, tuck it into a sleeve, strap it beneath his jacket. And every plan carried risk, but silence carried more. Storm huffed softly, as if agreeing. Lucas bent and hugged him tightly. "It's dangerous, I know, but I can't let him win. Not this time." The vow solidified into stone. He slid the notebook under his mattress, hid the phone in his drawer, and turned off the lamp. Darkness wrapped around him. Storm curled against his side, steady as a heartbeat. Lucas stared into the ceiling shadows, mind alive with plans. He thought of the men's whispers, the files coded with shipments, the cries of unseen dogs. He thought of his father's hand, heavy on his shoulder, warning disguised as affection. "I'll show them," Lucas whispered into the night. "I'll show them all." Storm's steady breathing answered like a promise. For the first time since his cry for help was dismissed, Lucas did not feel powerless. He felt prepared. A child, yes, but a child with a plan. And a vow no one, not even Victor, could silence. The house was wrapped in silence. A silence so heavy it pressed against Lucas's chest like stone. Corridors stretched long and dark, shadows breathing with their own life. Storm padded beside him, nails tapping faintly, body taut with alertness. For weeks, Lucas had passed the locked door in the west wing, the one no one mentioned. Servants always found reasons to pull him away, their eyes flickering with warning. But tonight, the house was still. His father was away. The servants were asleep. Storm stopped suddenly. Paw pressed against the base of the door, a growl rumbling low. Lucas's breath caught. "You feel it too," he whispered. The shepherd nosed the brass handle insistently. The lock had always stopped him, until now. Earlier, he'd stolen a key from Victor's study, its ornate handle smooth with use. Now, it weighed heavy in Lucas's hand, as though it carried every secret his father had buried. He hesitated, Victor's voice echoing in memory. "Hayes never questions. Hayes obeys." His throat tightened. Storm's amber eyes shone steady, like a vow. Lucas slid the key into the lock. The groan of metal echoed down the hall. He froze, heart hammering. But no one came. The door creaked open. A rush of stale air, chemicals, damp wood, rot, spilled out. He lit a candle. Its flickering glow revealed shelves stacked with boxes, scrawled in Victor's hand. Cryptic codes, dates, shipments. Papers littered a desk. Endurance trial results, dosage adjustments, failures. Vials gleamed faintly, filled with murky liquid. Storm whined and pawed at dark stains on the floor. Lucas's stomach lurched. He picked up a file, words blurring as he read. Subject 4. Resistance increasing. Side effects. Aggression. Subject 7. Collapse after 48 hours. Non-revivable. He dropped it, breath ragged. This was no accident, no mistake. It was cruelty. Systematic, deliberate, orchestrated beneath his own roof. Storm pressed his head against Lucas's thigh, keeping him upright. Then footsteps. Faint. Approaching. Panic surged. Lucas blew out the candle. Darkness swallowed the room. The key was still in his hand. If he was caught, there'd be no forgiveness. Storm darted into the hall, barking sharply. The servant outside gasped, startled, then cursed, chasing after the dog's racket. Lucas clutched a file to his chest, shaking with relief. Storm returned moments later, tail low but eyes bright. Lucas dropped to his knees, burying his face in the shepherd's fur. "You saved me." He had crossed a line he could never retreat from. The lock wasn't just broken, it was shattered. The key turned again, this time in the iron door at the far end of the wing. The hinges shrieked, stale air rushing out, foul with urine, feces, and old blood. Lucas gagged but stepped inside. A corridor stretched ahead, lit by flickering bulbs. Shadows crawled across damp concrete. Scratching, whining, and the rattle of chains echoed faintly. When his eyes adjusted, he saw them. Rows of cages, dozens of dogs, German shepherds, Malinois, mutts, scarred, filthy, their fur patchy from wounds. Some lifted heads weakly, eyes clouded, others pressed into corners, too afraid to move. A few barked hoarsely, but the sound was hollow, drained of threat. Lucas's knees buckled. His phone slipped in his grip before he caught it. With shaking fingers, he hit record. The lens captured what his heart could barely bear. Ribs protruding through skin, chains bolted into concrete, bowls crusted with mold. Tears blurred his sight. He wiped them roughly. "They have to see this," he whispered. "They can't ignore it now." Storm brushed against his leg, steadying him. Lucas moved down the row, filming every cage. The dogs followed him with hollow eyes and quiet whimpers. A cry pierced the noise, high-pitched, trembling like a child's sob. Lucas crouched. In a small cage near the back, a shepherd pup struggled to stand. Its paws slipped on the slick floor. Still, it stumbled forward, pressing a cold nose to his fingers through the bars. The fragile trust shattered him. Tears streamed as the pup licked his knuckles. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. Behind him, a grizzled shepherd dragged itself forward, chains clattering, blind in one eye. Its muzzle pressed through a gap, straining toward him. Lucas wanted to tear open every cage, but he knew he couldn't. Not yet. Not without proof strong enough to topple everything. He leaned close, whispering fiercely, "I swear, I'll bring help. I won't leave you here." Storm licked a tear from his cheek, sealing the vow. Lucas steadied the phone, forcing himself to film the worst wounds, the bloodstains, the scars. His hands shook, but he didn't stop. Every second mattered. Then, metal slammed. A door. Boots striking concrete. His blood iced. A guard's flashlight sliced through the dark. "Who's there?" Lucas pressed himself against the wall, clutching the phone to his chest. Storm growled low, urging him to move. The beam drew closer, boots steady and unhurried. He edged toward the stairwell. The shout cracked. "Stop!" The light locked on him, blinding. "What the hell are you doing?" Adrenaline exploded. Lucas bolted. Storm leapt ahead, claws scraping concrete, Behind them, boots thundered, the guard's voice echoing. "Stop that kid!" Chains rattled as the dogs howled, their cries rising into a desperate chorus. Lucas clutched the phone so hard it dug into his palm. If it fell, everything, every risk, every cage, would be lost. Storm barked, steering him toward the stairwell. They crashed upward, 2 steps at a time. Lucas stumbled, scraping his shin, lungs burning. The guard was close. They burst into Victor's study. The lamp glowed faintly on the desk, shadows stretching across the shelves. Lucas slammed the door, fumbling with the lock. A second later, it rattled violently. Storm snarled, body braced against it, as though he alone could hold it shut. The window. Lucas dashed to it, pried it open, cold night air rushing in. The door cracked, hinges groaning. Without thinking, he jumped. Storm leapt after him, landing hard in the grass. Pain shot up Lucas's legs, but he scrambled up, clutching the phone. "Storm, go!" They tore across the lawn toward the trees. Branches whipped at Lucas's arms as they plunged into the woods. Behind them, the guard crashed through the window, shouting, "Kid, stop before you regret it!" Gunfire split the night. Bark exploded from a tree inches from Lucas's head. He ducked, screaming, stumbling forward. Storm barked ferociously, pushing him onward, shielding him. They broke into a clearing, moonlight washing them silver. For a heartbeat, Lucas thought they were free, until another flashlight beam cut across the grass. Another guard. Trapped. Storm circled Lucas, growl deep, muscles quivering with fury. Lucas's tears streaked through dirt. His chest heaved with despair. 2 guards, armed, closing in. His only weapon was the phone in his hands. But even through terror, one truth burned. I have the proof. They can't erase it now. Not unless they erase me too. "Hold on," he whispered to the dogs he had left behind. "I'll come back. I swear it." Storm crouched beside him, amber eyes blazing. The chase wasn't over. It had only begun. And Lucas knew. He was no longer just a boy in the shadow of his father. He was a witness. And once you'd seen chains, you either turned away forever, or you broke them. The night was silent, except for the faint hum of Lucas's computer, its cracked monitor glowing pale blue. Storm lay curled at his feet, eyes open, always alert. Lucas's fingers trembled above the keyboard. Hours earlier, he had transferred the footage, rows of cages, scarred dogs, the clatter of chains. The images cut him like glass. The pup pressing its nose to his fingers haunted him most. He couldn't look away now. The police had ignored him before. To them, he was just a boy. But this was proof. He created an anonymous account. Silent witness. Storm's tail thumped once. Steady encouragement. Lucas dragged the folder into the upload box. The bar crawled forward. 32%, 59%, 84%. Each number, a drumbeat of danger and hope. At 100%, he closed his eyes, thought of the chained dogs, and clicked publish. At first, nothing. Then one comment. Another. Dozens. Hundreds. By morning, millions. In a newsroom, journalist Dana Torres watched between sips of stale coffee. At first, she thought it was fiction, but the shaky breathing, the raw images told her otherwise. "Get the editor in here," she shouted. "This is real." Screens lit up worldwide. Headlines formed. Underground dog. Prison exposed. Proof of cruelty ignites global outrage. Activists flooded forums, demanding justice. Anchors spoke with tight voices. Experts analyzed scars. The world, so often blind to cruelty, could not look away. Back in his room, Lucas stared at the climbing numbers. Frozen. He wasn't just Lucas Hayes anymore. He was the voice of every chained dog. Fear coiled in him, but for the first time he felt power. Not his father's kind, built on fear, but the power of truth. Outside, protests swelled. Signs read, "Justice for the dogs and end the chains." People hugged their pets tighter, whispered promises. Police hotlines flooded. Authorities who once dismissed him now had no choice but to act. But Lucas knew this was only the beginning. Men in suits behind tinted glass would stop at nothing to silence him. He buried his face in Storm's fur. "I did it, but they'll come for us." Storm stayed still, his breath steady. Morning broke with engines. Police vans and animal welfare trucks rolled down the drive, blue lights cutting through dawn haze. Volunteers carried bolt cutters and blankets. From behind a hedge, Lucas clutched Storm's leash, heart racing. Officers surged forward. The battering ram struck. Gates splintered open. For the first time, justice stepped onto his father's estate. Storm barked wildly, tugging until Lucas let go. The shepherd bolted ahead, guiding officers straight to the iron door Lucas had once opened, with shaking hands. "Here!" a voice shouted. Bolt cutters snapped. The door swung wide. Gasps filled the hall. Dozens of dogs, emaciated, scarred, their eyes glazed with despair. Whimpers rose into a haunting chorus. Even hardened officers staggered at the sight. "Cut them loose." Chains fell. Blankets wrapped frail bodies. Cameras captured every second. Storm pawed at cages, barking furiously. A young officer forced one open, and a trembling shepherd collapsed into her arms. More followed. A chaos became a rescue. Lucas stood in the doorway, tears streaming. This time his recording wasn't evidence. It was memory. Proof that darkness could be broken. Then, shouts. "Movement upstairs!" Storm bolted toward the stairwell. Lucas ran after him, officers pounding behind. A guard burst out with a gun, but Storm lunged, knocking him flat. The weapons skittered across the floor. Officers piled on, restraining him. Room by room, they uncovered more horrors. Cages stacked like crates. Ledgers naming dogs. Coded shipments. This was no isolated cruelty. It was a network. And now, it was collapsing. By midday, the estate no longer felt like a fortress. Dogs streamed into daylight, carried or stumbling, blinking against freedom. News cameras caught it all. Volunteers cradling Malinois like children. Officers kneeling as shepherds licked gloved hands. Storm stood on the steps, barking triumphantly. Lucas knelt in the grass, clutching Storm's fur. "We did it," he whispered. "They're safe." Days later, Victor Hale stood in handcuffs, dragged from the marble steps where he had once played the benevolent patriarch. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted, "Is it true you ran a fighting ring? Do you have anything to say to the children who saw the footage?" For once, Victor had no speeches. His empire, built on bribes and intimidation, crumbled in real time. In court, the evidence was unflinching. The footage, the ledgers, the dogs themselves, every detail stripped away the myth of philanthropy. His allies vanished. His name was scrubbed from hospital wings and scholarship plaques. Still, Victor sneered. "Do you think I'm the only one? This city thrives on blood. I'm just your spectacle." The gallery gasped. But silence met him. He was alone. The sentencing was swift, decades behind bars. The gavel fell, and cheers erupted. Outside, thousands gathered, chanting for reform, holding signs with faces of shepherds, pit bulls, hounds, not just the rescued, but the countless lost. Journalists focused on Lucas, standing small but unshaken. Storm pressed to his side. He had once been invisible. Now he was the symbol of a movement. Storm lifted his head proudly, barking once. Cameras caught it, the sound of triumph. The Titan had fallen, not by power, but by loyalty, courage, and the bond between a boy and his dog. Victor's empire lay in ruins. In its ashes, a vow rose, never again. And for Lucas, though nightmares would linger, he finally understood true strength. Not control, not fear, but love, loyalty, and the courage to stand against the impossible. The storm of truth had broken, and the world would never forget. The dawn was pale when the last truck rolled out through the shattered gates of Victor's estate. Its cages rattled softly, each carrying souls who had endured too much. Shepherds, Malinois, Labradors, mutts with matted coats and haunted eyes. Some whimpered, others pressed wet noses against the wire, as though afraid freedom might vanish with the sunrise. Lucas stood in the courtyard with Storm, both coated in dust, exhaustion etched into their frames. The air still carried the metallic tang of chains, but beneath it lingered something new: straw bedding, antiseptic, and the faint scent of hope from triage tents. Volunteers moved with quiet urgency. Young women knelt with bowls of clean water. Old men spread blankets across the grass. Veterinarians murmured reassurances as they checked scarred bodies. Each dog, no matter how broken, was treated as something precious. Storm barked once, low and steady, his eyes tracking the line of cages being lifted into another van, making sure none were left behind. "You did this," Lucas whispered, tightening his grip on the shepherd's collar. "You saved them." Storm only looked back, amber eyes unwavering, reminding Lucas that victories carried shadows too. A woman in a reflective vest approached with a clipboard. Her cheeks were streaked with tears. She gave Lucas a soft, knowing smile. "Some may not make it," she said. "Too much damage, too many years. But because of you, they have a chance. They'll know kindness, even if only for a little while." The words burrowed deep. Lucas nodded mutely, because how could he explain the war in his chest, the pride of seeing hundreds freed, colliding with guilt that he hadn't been there sooner? Storm nudged his hand, grounding him. Lucas crouched, pressing his forehead to the dogs. "We keep going," he murmured. "We owe them that much." News crews swarmed the wreckage. Reporters spoke into microphones about cruelty and corruption, cameras sweeping over cages stacked like silent witnesses. Lucas turned away. He couldn't bear to see tragedy reduced to sound bites. Not yet. Instead, he walked into the triage tent. Inside, rows of kennels were lined with towels. Dogs lay curled, some sedated after surgery, others trembling as volunteers stroked them. Lucas paused before a skeletal shepherd. Her ribs jutted sharp beneath patchy fur, yet with immense effort she lifted her head. Her eyes met his. Something broke. Lucas sank to his knees, pressing his hand to the mesh. Slowly, the dog dragged herself forward, resting her muzzle against his palm. The touch was feather-light, uncertain, both plea and thank you. Tears spilled freely. "You're safe now," he whispered. "I swear, you're safe." Storm sat beside him, silent, as though honoring a sacred vow. Volunteers gave him space, sensing instinctively that this boy and his dog were woven into the story in ways no one else could understand. When Lucas finally stood, his legs trembled, but his eyes burned with quiet fire. Her freedom was only the first step. Healing would take years, for the dogs, for him, for Storm. But now, at least, the path existed. Outside, sunlight poured over the broken fences, gilding ruin in gold. For the first time, the estate no longer looked like a fortress of nightmares. It looked like a graveyard of cruelty. A rescuer waved him over. "Some are going to the sanctuary upstate," she explained. "Fields, vets, people trained for trauma. Want to ride with them?" Lucas looked at Storm, whose ears pricked at the word ride. A faint smile touched his lips. "Yeah, we'll go." In the back of the truck, dogs lay on blankets, sniffing at him cautiously. Lucas settled between them, Storm curling at his side. As the doors closed, the engine rumbled. The boy leaned his head against the cool wall, eyes heavy with exhaustion, but heart alive with something fragile. Hope. The air smelled different now, not of iron or fear, but of cut grass and spring blossoms. Storm lifted his head without hesitation, ears forward. The world was open again. At the sanctuary, the field buzzed with rescuers, guiding dogs into clean kennels. Amid the chaos, Storm stood apart. Not because of scars, but because of his quiet dignity. Cameras drifted toward him. The shepherd who had once growled through rusted bars, now standing tall beside the boy who freed him. "That's him," a reporter whispered. "The dog from the footage." Indeed, the leaked video had circled the globe in hours. The single frame of Storm's defiant amber eyes behind bars had become the emblem of a movement. Now, volunteers paused to stroke his back, some whispering thanks, others too moved to speak. Lucas remembered their first meeting in that dark corridor. Matted fur, ribs sharp, eyes full of pain. Storm had stood between him and danger even then. Now he wasn't just a survivor. He was resilient and made flesh. "Storm," Lucas whispered, voice tight. "You're free. You're home." The shepherd lowered his head, pressing it against Lucas's chest. Not submission, trust, whole and unbroken. The mayor arrived, flanked by welfare leaders. Cameras clicked. "Today," he declared, "we celebrate not only the rescue of over 200 dogs, but the courage of one who represents them all. Storm is more than a survivor. He is proof justice can triumph, even against the darkest forces." Applause rippled. Storm stiffened, ears twitching. But instead of shrinking, he lifted his head, chest swelling, as if to breathe in the honor. Then, a small girl stepped forward, clutching wildflowers. She crouched, offering them to him. Lucas held his breath. Storm sniffed, wagged once, then gently took the flowers between his teeth. The crowd erupted in soft laughter and applause, many wiping their eyes. Storm had not just survived, he has transcended. That evening, beneath the oak tree on sanctuary grounds, Lucas sat with Storm as the last vans carried dogs to new homes. For many, it was the beginning of life. For Storm, it was redemption. "Do you realize what you've done?" Lucas whispered, stroking scarred fur. "You made the world listen." Storm leaned into him, amber eyes reflecting sunset. Words weren't needed. The boy who risked everything, and the dog who refused to break, had become family. For the first time, Lucas breathed without fear. Both had been fractured, but together they were whole. "You're not just Storm anymore," he murmured. "You're hope. And as long as I'm here, you'll never be alone again." Storm rested his head on Lucas's lap, eyes closing, not listening for chains or footsteps, but to the steady rhythm of a heartbeat he trusted. Weeks later, the press hall was packed. Cameras perched on tripods, pens poised. At the podium, Lucas rested a hand on Storm's back. Around the shepherd's neck hung a medallion engraved, symbol of survival. His coat gleamed under spotlights, his eyes calm and steady. Lucas unfolded a note card, then set it aside. He spoke from the heart. His voice trembled, then steadied. "Not long ago, I was just another boy in a town no one remembered. I didn't choose this. But sometimes, the truth chooses you." The room stilled. Behind him, still frames of the footage appeared. Cages, hollow eyes. Gasps rippled, even though the images had already circled the globe. "These weren't just dogs," Lucas continued. "They weren't tools or shadows. They were alive, beating hearts capable of loyalty, of love, of suffering. And they were buried in darkness, so someone could build an empire of cruelty." He paused, voice softening. "One dog changed everything. Storm. Broken, but not defeated. He taught me survival isn't just enduring pain. It's refusing to let pain define you." Storm shifted, leaning into him. Lucas's hand pressed into his fur. "Storm is proof that even in the darkest cages, hope survives. That loyalty doesn't die. That love doesn't vanish when it's starved. Because of him, hundreds are free today, and many more will be tomorrow." Applause swelled. Lucas lifted a hand, asking for quiet. His eyes held gravity far beyond his years. "This isn't just one villain falling. It's about us. Do we turn away when injustice hides behind locked doors, or do we step closer, even when it hurts? Every silence keeps another cage closed." The words struck deep. Some reporters dabbed at their eyes. Others scribbled furiously. Millions watched live across the world. Lucas's final words rang steady. "I'm no hero. I'm just a boy who refused to let go of a dog." Change doesn't start with courts or headlines. It starts with us. How we choose to fight for the voiceless. Let today be the line where we said, "Never again." The hall erupted in thunderous applause. Cameras flashed as Lucas lowered himself beside Storm. The shepherd lifted his paw. Lucas curled his hand around it. Flesh and fur, human and animal, survivor and symbol. The cameras caught it, the image that would flood front pages worldwide. A boy and his dog, bonded in quiet strength, their story a living legacy. Lucas whispered into Storm's ear, unheard by the crowd. "We did it, buddy. And we'll keep doing it. For them." Storm pressed into him, amber eyes steady. And in that silent gesture, the movement found its heartbeat. At the heart of every story like this one is a reminder. Animals are not just companions, they are family. The loyalty of a German shepherd, the way a dog will stand by you through pain and joy, speaks to something timeless in all of us. These bonds teach us patience, trust, and a kind of love that asks for nothing in return. If you've ever felt that quiet comfort when your dog rests their head on your knee, or that spark of joy when they wag their tail at the sound of your voice, you already know how powerful this connection can be. It's something worth nurturing every day. There's a resource I've come across that might deepen that bond even further. It's not about training tricks or gimmicks. It's about understanding your dog's heart and strengthening the trust you share. I'll leave the link here if you'd like to take a look. Think of it as a gentle invitation from one dog lover to another. Because in the end, what matters most isn't just the years we share with them. It's the love, loyalty, and memories that last a lifetime.